The dust settled around Dahlia Montgomery as she slumped against the weathered exterior of Cottonwood's only saloon, her once fine dress now torn and soiled beyond recognition. Wyoming Territory, 1876, a place and time that had shown her little mercy since her arrival 3 weeks prior. The stagecoach that had delivered her to this remote mining town had carried away her last shred of respectability along with it when it disappeared over the horizon. Dahlia's trembling hand clutched a crumpled telegram, the final correspondence from her late father, summoning her west to claim his fortune before his unexpected passing. What she had found instead was a worthless claim deed and mountains of gambling debts. The mining town's inhabitants had made it abundantly clear what they thought a woman alone might do to settle such accounts. "You there, move along," the saloon owner's shout made her flinch. "Having your kind loitering outside is bad for business." She struggled to her feet, ignoring the jeers from 2 miners leaning against a hitching post. Their eyes followed her with predatory interest as she stumbled toward the town's dusty main street. "Where you running off to, pretty thing?" one called after her. "Ain't nobody paying your way out of town. Maybe we could work something out." Dahlia quickened her pace despite her exhaustion. 3 days without proper food or shelter had taken their toll. The cruel summer sun beat down, and her parched throat ached for water. She'd been turned away from every respectable establishment in town once word spread about her father's reputation. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered until the massive Palomino stallion halted directly in her path. Dahlia looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun's glare, to see the silhouette of a man astride the magnificent animal. "Miss, you look like you could use some assistance." His voice carried the slight drawl of someone who'd spent considerable time in Texas, though it lacked the harsh edge she'd come to expect from the local men. "I'm managing just fine, sir," she replied, attempting dignity despite her appearance. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing his considerable height. His face remained shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jawline dusted with several days' worth of stubble. He wore simple trail clothes, a faded blue shirt, well-worn denim, and a leather vest rather than the flashy attire favored by Cottonwood's gamblers and would-be gunmen. "Quinn Blackwood," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "And forgive my forwardness, but managing just fine doesn't appear to be the case." "My circumstances are temporary," Dahlia insisted, straightening her spine despite the weakness in her legs. "I simply need to," her voice faltered as dizziness overwhelmed her. Quinn moved with surprising speed, catching her before she collapsed completely. "Easy now," he said softly, supporting her weight with strong hands. "When's the last time you ate something, miss?" "Montgomery, Dahlia Montgomery," she hesitated, pride warring with desperation. "Yesterday. Or perhaps the day before." Quinn's expression darkened as he took in her full appearance, the torn dress, the dirt streaking her face and hands, the hopelessness in her eyes. "Miss Montgomery, I own a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. My housekeeper, Mrs. Guthrie, could use some help with household matters. It would provide you with honest work, meals, and a roof. No strings attached." Dahlia stiffened. She'd heard similar offers since arriving in Cottonwood, all with unspoken expectations she refused to meet. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked, suspicion evident in her voice. Quinn stepped back, giving her space despite having just prevented her fall. "Because everybody deserves a chance, Miss Montgomery, and because I know what it's like to be judged by appearances and circumstances beyond your control." His eyes, a striking blue that reminded her of summer skies back in Boston, held no guile or hidden intent that she could detect. Still, experience had taught her caution. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Blackwood, but I couldn't possibly—" "2 meals a day and a clean place to sleep," he interrupted. "1 week's trial. If you're uncomfortable for any reason, I'll bring you back to town with a week's wages in your pocket." "Fair enough." The miners who had been watching their exchange began sauntering closer, their intentions clear in their leering expressions. Dahlia weighed her options quickly. The devil she didn't know versus the devils she did. 1 week, she agreed, her voice barely audible. Quinn nodded, then removed his canteen from his saddle and offered it to her. Small sips, he advised as she gratefully accepted it. After she'd taken a few careful drinks, he gathered the reins of his horse. Can you ride? It's been some time, but yes. With surprising gentleness for a man of his size, Quinn helped her mount the palomino before swinging up behind her. His presence at her back was solid and warm, but he maintained a respectful distance as he reached around her for the reins. Hold on to the saddle horn, he instructed. Shadow here has a smooth gait, but the trail gets rough in places. As they rode out of Cottonwood, Dahlia felt the eyes of the townspeople following them. Whispers would surely spread by nightfall. Another fallen woman. Another victim of Cottonwood's harsh reality. She hunched her shoulders, shame burning through her despite her innocence. Straighten up, Quinn said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. You've got nothing to be ashamed of. You don't know anything about me, she replied bitterly. I know you're covered in dust and shame right now, he acknowledged, his voice matter of fact rather than judgmental. But that's not what I see when I look at you. Dahlia turned slightly, trying to read his expression. What do you see? Quinn's eyes met hers briefly before returning to the trail ahead. Someone who hasn't given up. That counts for something out here. They rode in silence after that, the rhythmic movement of the horse and the heat of the day lulling Dahlia into an exhausted daze. The landscape changed gradually from the barren surroundings of the mining town to rolling grasslands dotted with cottonwoods and pines. Almost there, Quinn announced after they'd crossed a small creek. That's Whispering Pines ahead. Dahlia roused herself enough to look at the approaching homestead. It wasn't the grand ranch she'd expected based on the confidence in Quinn's manner, but rather a modest spread with a well-built main house, a barn, and several outbuildings. A small herd of cattle grazed in the distance, and a vegetable garden flourished beside the house. As they approached, an older woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her expression was guarded as she watched them approach. Mrs. Guthrie, Quinn called out as he brought the horse to a stop. We have a guest who will be staying with us for a while. The housekeeper's eyes narrowed as she took in Dahlia's bedraggled appearance. Another one of your strays, Mr. Blackwood. There was resignation rather than malice in her tone. Miss Montgomery needs some rest and a meal, Quinn replied, dismounting before helping Dahlia down. Her legs nearly buckled as they touched the ground, and he steadied her with a hand at her elbow. She needs more than that, Mrs. Guthrie observed, her initial wariness softening as she noticed Dahlia's condition. Come inside, girl. Let's get you cleaned up. Dahlia hesitated, looking back at Quinn. Mr. Blackwood, Go on, he encouraged. Mrs. Guthrie will take good care of you. We can talk about arrangements tomorrow after you've rested. As Mrs. Guthrie led her toward the house, Dahlia heard Quinn leading his horse toward the barn, whistling softly. The normalcy of the scene so at odds with the chaos of her recent existence brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Inside, the house was simple but immaculately kept. Mrs. Guthrie showed her to a small but clean bedroom at the back of the house. This was my daughter's room before she married and moved to Denver, the older woman explained. There are clean clothes in the chest. They might be a bit large for you, but they'll do until we can wash what you've got. Thank you, Dahlia whispered, overwhelmed by the kindness after weeks of cruelty and indifference. Mrs. Guthrie's expression softened further. The bathhouse is out back. I'll heat water while you rest a bit. Then food. You look about ready to blow away in a strong wind. When the older woman left, Dahlia sank onto the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the clean, faded quilt. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept on anything other than a wooden bench or the hard ground. Despite her best intentions to remain alert in this strange place, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a deep sleep still sitting upright on the bed's edge. She awoke to gentle shaking and Mrs. Guthrie's concerned face. "There you are," the housekeeper said. "Bath's ready and so is supper after. Come along now." The small bathhouse behind the main house was simple: a metal tub, a stool, and shelves holding soap and towels, but to Dahlia, it was paradise. Mrs. Guthrie left her with instructions to leave her soiled clothes outside the door, where they'd be collected for washing. Dahlia sank into the warm water with a sigh that came from her soul. As she scrubbed away layers of dirt and despair, she wondered about the man who had brought her here. Quinn Blackwood didn't match any of the types she'd encountered in Cottonwood. He wasn't a smooth, talking gambler or a rough miner. He lacked the dangerous edge of the gunslingers who drifted through town, yet there was something in his bearing that suggested he could handle trouble if it found him. By the time she emerged from the bathhouse, wearing a simple calico dress that hung slightly loose on her frame, the sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The sight stopped her in her tracks, its beauty a sharp contrast to the ugliness she'd endured. "First sunset at Whispering Pines," came Quinn's voice from nearby. He stood by the corner of the house, arms crossed as he leaned against the wall. "They never get old." Dahlia self-consciously touched her damp hair, which hung loose around her shoulders without the pins that had been lost during her ordeal. "I didn't realize you were there. Just came to tell you supper's ready." His gaze swept over her, noting the change in her appearance, but there was nothing inappropriate in his assessment. "You look better." "Amazing what soap and water can accomplish," she replied with a hint of the wit that had once been as natural to her as breathing. The corner of Quinn's mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Come on, Mrs. Guthrie doesn't tolerate cold food on her table." The kitchen was warm and filled with enticing aromas that made Dahlia's stomach growl audibly. A sturdy table was set for 3, and Mrs. Guthrie was placing a large pot of stew in the center alongside a loaf of fresh bread. "Sit, both of you," the housekeeper instructed, "before it gets cold." Quinn pulled out a chair for Dahlia before taking his own seat. The gesture, so civilized and unexpected in this remote setting, reminded her of the Boston society she'd left behind. "We say grace here," Quinn said, extending his hands to both women. Mrs. Guthrie took one without hesitation, while Dahlia more tentatively placed her fingers in his other hand. His palm was calloused but warm, the grip gentle as he bowed his head. "Lord, we thank you for this food and for bringing Miss Montgomery safely to our table. May she find rest and healing under this roof. Amen." The simple prayer touched something deep within Dahlia. When was the last time anyone had expressed gratitude for her presence? Mrs. Guthrie served generous portions, though she cautioned Dahlia to eat slowly after her period of hunger. The stew was hearty and delicious, the bread still warm from the oven. Dahlia forced herself to take small bites despite her body's demand for sustenance. "Tell us about yourself, Miss Montgomery," Quinn said, after they'd eaten in silence for several minutes. "What brought you to Wyoming Territory?" Dahlia hesitated, her spoon pausing halfway to her mouth. "My father," she finally answered. "He wrote that he'd struck it rich in the Cottonwood mines and wanted me to join him. By the time I arrived, he had passed on. Leaving you with nothing but debts, I'd wager," Mrs. Guthrie said shrewdly. Dahlia nodded, her appetite suddenly diminished despite the excellent food. "He was not the man I remembered from my childhood. Gambling and drink had changed him, it seems." "Daniel Montgomery," Quinn said, surprising her. "I met him once or twice in town. He spoke of a daughter back east. Said she was too good for the likes of Cottonwood." "You knew my father?" Dahlia's eyes widened. "Not well," Quinn admitted, "but enough to know he was proud of you. He'd show anyone who'd listen a photograph he carried you in a fancy dress at some society event." Tears threatened at this unexpected connection. "He still had that. It was taken at my graduation from Miss Porter's school 3 years ago." He may have had his failings, Quinn said gently, but his love for you wasn't one of them. Dahlia blinked rapidly, trying to maintain her composure. It doesn't change my current situation. No, Quinn agreed, but knowing you were loved counts for something. Mrs. Guthrie cleared her throat. Mr. Blackwood mentioned you might help with household duties. Can you cook? Grateful for the change of subject, Dahlia straightened. My culinary skills are limited, I'm afraid, but I can learn. I sew quite well, and I've managed household accounts. Reading and figures? Quinn asked with interest. Yes, both. I was fortunate to receive a good education. Quinn and Mrs. Guthrie exchanged a look that Dahlia couldn't interpret. That could be useful, Quinn said. I've been needing help with the ranch ledgers and correspondence. Mrs. Guthrie handles the house admirably, but an extra pair of hands is always welcome. I wouldn't want to impose, Dahlia began. Nonsense, Mrs. Guthrie interrupted. This place could use a woman's touch beyond what these old hands can provide. The mending alone has piled up something fierce. After supper, despite Dahlia's protests that she should help with the dishes, Mrs. Guthrie shooed her off to bed, insisting she needed rest more than the kitchen needed another pair of hands. As she settled into the surprisingly comfortable bed, Dahlia stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the day's dramatic turn. The clean nightgown against her freshly washed skin, the full meal in her stomach, and the soft mattress beneath her felt like impossible luxuries after her recent experiences. She wasn't naive enough to believe her troubles were over. One day of kindness didn't erase the precariousness of her position as a woman alone in the West. But for the first time since receiving news of her father's death, Dahlia allowed herself to feel something dangerously close to hope. Morning came with the sounds of a working ranch rooster's crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, the rhythmic chopping of wood. Dahlia dressed quickly in another of the borrowed dresses, this one a faded blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and ventured out to the kitchen. Mrs. Guthrie was already there, kneading dough with strong, practiced movements. About time you stirred, she said, though her tone held no reproach. Coffee's hot. Help yourself. Dahlia poured a cup of the strong brew, doctoring it with a splash of cream from the pitcher on the table. What can I help with? Quinn's taken breakfast to the bunkhouse for the hands, Mrs. Guthrie explained. He'll be back shortly. Meanwhile, you can gather eggs if you're up to it. Given a basket and directions to the henhouse, Dahlia set out on her first ranch chore. The morning air was crisp and clean, the sky an endless blue canopy above the pine-studded hills surrounding the ranch. She breathed deeply, finding unexpected pleasure in the simple task ahead. The chickens regarded her suspiciously as she entered their domain, but they allowed her to collect the warm eggs from beneath them with minimal fuss. As she carefully placed each one in her basket, Dahlia found herself smiling at the simple accomplishment. You look different when you smile. She turned to find Quinn leaning against the doorframe of the henhouse, his tall frame blocking much of the light. Unlike yesterday, she could see him clearly now, the strong lines of his face, the weathered tan of someone who lived his life outdoors, the surprising gentleness in his blue eyes. It feels strange, she admitted. Smiling, I haven't had much cause lately. Well, it suits you. He straightened and stepped aside to let her pass with her basket of eggs. I thought we might talk about your duties here if you're feeling up to it. Of course. Dahlia followed him back toward the house, noting how the ranch hands working nearby nodded respectfully as Quinn passed. There were only 3 of them, that she could see an older man with a pronounced limp, a young cowboy who couldn't be more than 18, and a middle-aged man of Mexican descent who was expertly training a horse in a small corral. It's not a big operation, Quinn explained, following her gaze. Just enough to keep us busy and fed, beef cattle mostly, a few horses I train and sell. It seems peaceful, Dahlia observed. Quinn's expression darkened momentarily. It is now, wasn't always. Before she could ask what he meant, they reached the house where Mrs. Guthrie had set out more coffee and fresh biscuits on the kitchen table. Miss Montgomery, Quinn began as they sat down. "I want to be clear about what I'm offering here. A job, nothing more, nothing less. Fair pay for fair work." "What exactly would my duties entail?" Dahlia asked, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup for warmth despite the mild morning. "As I mentioned last night, I need help with correspondence and bookkeeping. I've never had much patience for paperwork, and the ranch is growing enough that it's becoming a problem. You'd also help Mrs. Guthrie with household matters, sewing, as you mentioned, perhaps some cooking lessons." He glanced at the housekeeper, who nodded approvingly. "I can manage that," Dahlia said, her confidence growing. "But Mr. Blackwood, I should tell you that I have no experience with ranch life." "I may make mistakes. We all do," he replied simply. "The only mistake that matters is not learning from the first one." They discussed terms: a small monthly salary plus room and board, with 1 day off each week. It was far less than Dahlia would have earned as a teacher or companion back east, but those options weren't available to her here, and the arrangement offered something money couldn't buy: safety and respect. "There's one more thing," Quinn said, as they concluded their discussion. "Cottonwood is a small town with a big appetite for gossip. Your presence here will cause talk." Dahlia's cheeks warmed. "I hadn't considered that. I wouldn't want to damage your reputation." Quinn's laugh was short and without humor. "My reputation can withstand it, but yours." He hesitated. "If you stay, there will be assumptions, unfair ones." "There already are," Dahlia said quietly. "At least here, I'll know the truth of my situation, even if others don't." Mrs. Guthrie cleared her throat. "Having me here helps some with the appearances. And Quinn's not one to care what folks think anyway." "True enough," Quinn agreed, "but you should know what you're agreeing to." Dahlia met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Blackwood, after what I've endured these past weeks, the opinions of strangers are the least of my concerns. I accept your offer." Quinn extended his hand across the table, and she took it. His handshake was firm but not overpowering, a gesture between equals. "Welcome to Whispering Pines, Miss Montgomery." The days settled into a rhythm that Dahlia found unexpectedly satisfying. Mornings were devoted to helping Mrs. Guthrie with household chores, learning to bake bread, hanging laundry in the sweet mountain air, gathering vegetables from the thriving garden. Afternoons found her in Quinn's small office adjacent to the main house, bringing order to chaotic piles of invoices, receipts, and correspondence. Quinn's business affairs were more extensive than she'd initially assumed. Beyond the cattle and horses, he had investments in several legitimate businesses in nearby towns and even a small silver mine that was beginning to show promise. When she questioned him about it, his answer was typically straightforward. "Cattle are vulnerable to too many things beyond a man's control: weather, disease, rustlers. Diversifying means surviving the bad years." His practical wisdom impressed her, as did his fairness with his small crew. Domingo, the Mexican horse trainer, had been with Quinn the longest 7 years and was treated more like a partner than an employee. Old Jim, the cook with the pronounced limp, had been a respected frontiersman before a grizzly bear ended his roaming days. Young Toby, barely out of boyhood, was learning ranching from the ground up under Quinn's patient tutelage. By the end of her first week, Dahlia had organized Quinn's paperwork into a manageable system, darned a mountain of socks, and learned to make a passable apple pie under Mrs. Guthrie's instruction. More importantly, she'd begun to feel useful again, her spirits lifting with each small accomplishment. "Your week's trial is up," Quinn reminded her as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. "What's your verdict?" Dahlia turned to look at him, noting how the evening light softened the weathered contours of his face. "I'd like to stay, if you'll have me." Something like relief flickered in his eyes. "Good. Mrs. Guthrie would never forgive me if I let her new kitchen apprentice get away." "Is that all I am?" Dahlia asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. Quinn studied her for a long moment. "No," he finally said. But what else you might be is yet to be determined, don't you think? The honesty of his answer warmed her more than any flowery compliment could have. Yes, she agreed softly. I suppose it is. As summer ripened toward autumn, Dahlia's place at Whispering Pines became more established. Her borrowed clothing was gradually replaced by new garments she sewed herself from fabrics Quinn brought back from his occasional trips to Cottonwood or the larger settlement of Laramie. Her city pallor gave way to a healthy glow born of fresh air and wholesome food. The haunted look faded from her eyes, though she still woke sometimes from nightmares of her desperate days in Cottonwood. Quinn remained something of an enigma, despite their daily interactions. He was unfailingly courteous, but maintained a certain reserve that Dahlia found herself increasingly curious to penetrate. He spoke little of his past, though occasional comments from the ranch hands suggested he hadn't always been the respected rancher he now was. Boss fought in the war, old Jim mentioned one evening as they all shared supper in the bunkhouse, a Friday tradition Dahlia had learned. Confederate side, though he don't hold with their cause no more. Jim, Quinn's quiet voice held a warning, ancient history isn't worth revisiting. Ain't so ancient, Jim persisted. Shaped who you are, same as all of us. Dahlia watched Quinn's face close like a shuttered window. Some things are better left buried, he said, rising from the table. Miss Montgomery, would you care for a walk before it gets dark? She recognized the invitation as an escape from Jim's uncomfortable reminiscences and accepted quickly. They strolled toward the creek that bordered the eastern edge of the ranch property, neither speaking until they were well away from the bunkhouse. You don't have to tell me anything, Dahlia said finally, breaking the tense silence. Quinn glanced at her, then back at the path ahead. It's not that I'm keeping secrets, exactly, just that some memories don't improve with airing. I understand, she said, thinking of her own painful past, her mother's early death, her father's decline into gambling and drink, the desperate letters she'd ignored until the final one. Sometimes looking forward is easier than looking back. Exactly. He sounded relieved that she didn't press for details. And speaking of looking forward, I've been thinking about improvements to the ranch. The operation's growing, and with your help getting the books in order, I can see we're in a position to expand. As he outlined his plans for additional grazing land and a larger herd, Dahlia found herself caught up in his vision. The way he described it, she could almost see Whispering Pines 5 years hence, a thriving cattle operation with a reputation for quality stock and fair dealing. You've accomplished so much already, she observed as they paused by the creek, where the water burbled pleasantly over smooth stones. Most men would be satisfied. Quinn bent to pick up a flat stone, which he skipped across the water's surface with practiced ease. My pa used to say a man who's satisfied has stopped growing, might as well dig his grave right then. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Quinn agreed, a rare softness entering his voice. Hard-headed as they come, but wise in the ways that matter. Is he? Dahlia let the question trail off delicately. Passed on 10 years ago. Heart gave out while he was mending fence on a spring morning. Not a bad way to go, all things considered. Quinn skipped another stone. Your turn. Dahlia looked at him in surprise. I've never done this before. Never skipped stones? Quinn seemed genuinely shocked. What did you do for fun in Boston? Piano lessons. Needlepoint. Appropriate activities for a young lady of good family, she replied with a small laugh. Not much call for stone skipping in proper society. Well, you're in Wyoming now, Quinn said, selecting a smooth, flat stone and placing it in her palm. Stand like this. He demonstrated the stance. And throw like this. His arm moved in a fluid, sideways motion. Dahlia attempted to mimic his movement, but her stone plopped unceremoniously into the water with a single splash. Not bad for a first try, Quinn encouraged, though his twitching lips betrayed his amusement. Here, let me show you. He moved behind her, his chest warm against her back as he guided her arm through the proper motion. His nearness sent a flutter through her stomach that had nothing to do with stone skipping and everything to do with the woodsy scent of him and the gentle strength in his hands. "Like this," he murmured, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. Fluid and low. Under his guidance, her next stone skipped twice before sinking. Dahlia turned to him with delight, momentarily forgetting their proximity. "I did it." Quinn didn't step back immediately, his blue eyes warming as they met hers. "You're a quick study, Miss Montgomery." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of possibilities that neither had acknowledged before. Then Quinn cleared his throat and stepped away, the spell broken but not forgotten. "We should head back," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "It'll be dark soon." They walked back to the ranch in a silence that held new awareness. At the porch steps, Quinn paused. "Thank you for not prying," he said quietly. "About the war and after, not many would show such restraint." "We all have chapters we'd rather not read aloud," Dahlia replied. "When if you ever want to share yours, I'll listen, but I won't ask." He studied her face in the gathering twilight. "You're an unusual woman, Dahlia Montgomery." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart quicken. "Is that a compliment, Mr. Blackwood?" "Quinn," he corrected. "And yes, it most definitely is." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Whispering Pines. Dahlia was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching and turned to see a well-dressed man riding up the main path. His tailored suit and bowler hat marked him as a town dweller rather than a rancher or cowboy. Quinn emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag as he went to meet the visitor. Though she couldn't hear their conversation, Dahlia could see Quinn's posture stiffen as the man dismounted and presented what appeared to be an official document. Their discussion grew animated, with the stranger gesturing emphatically while Quinn stood impassive, arms crossed over his chest. Finally, the man remounted his horse and rode away, casting a curious glance toward Dahlia as he passed. Quinn remained where he stood for several minutes after the visitor departed, staring at the paper in his hand. The rigid set of his shoulders told Dahlia something was seriously wrong. She debated whether to approach him or give him privacy, but the decision was made for her when Quinn turned and strode toward the house, his expression grim. He saw her by the clothesline and altered his course. "Is everything all right?" she asked as he reached her. "No," he said bluntly. That was Lawrence Davies, attorney for the Western Mining Consortium. They're claiming rights to a portion of Whispering Pines, the northeast section, including the creek and the best grazing land. Dahlia's hand flew to her mouth. "How can they do that?" "They say they have a deed signed by the previous owner before I bought the property." Quinn's jaw worked as he struggled to control his anger. "It's a forgery. Has to be. I have clear title to every acre of this ranch. What will you do?" "Fight them, of course." Quinn folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. But these corporate mining interests have deep pockets and friends in territorial government. It won't be easy. Dahlia thought of the organized ledgers and correspondence in Quinn's office. "Do you have the original deed and bill of sale?" "In the safe at the bank in Laramie. I'll ride in tomorrow to retrieve them." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "I'm sorry to burden you with this." "Don't be ridiculous," Dahlia said firmly. "This is your home and currently mine as well. I want to help." Quinn's expression softened slightly. "There's not much you can do, but I appreciate the sentiment." "On the contrary," Dahlia countered, "I may not know much about ranching, but I understand legal matters better than most women. My father insisted I learn, saying a woman ignorant of the law is at everyone's mercy." Interest flickered in Quinn's eyes. "Is that so? Then perhaps you'd be willing to look over these documents when I return from Laramie. A fresh perspective couldn't hurt." "I'd be happy to," Dahlia agreed, pleased that he valued her abilities. "In the meantime, should we tell the others?" Quinn considered briefly. "No point worrying them until we know more. Let's keep this between us for now." "Of course." Dahlia hesitated, then added, Quinn, whoever is behind this, they chose their target poorly. You don't strike me as a man who surrenders what's his without a fight. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, I'm not, and Whispering Pines is definitely mine. His gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary. As are all those who call it home. The simple declaration shouldn't have made her heart race, but it did. In the weeks she'd been at the ranch, it had indeed begun to feel like home, and Quinn Blackwood had become far more than merely her employer. Quinn departed for Laramie early the next morning, leaving Dahlia with instructions to manage any ranch business that couldn't wait for his return the following day. The responsibility both flattered and intimidated her, but Mrs. Guthrie's matter-of-fact confidence bolstered her courage. He wouldn't have asked if he didn't think you could handle it, the housekeeper pointed out as they prepared breakfast. Quinn's not one for empty gestures. I'm beginning to realize that, Dahlia admitted, kneading dough with newfound skill. He's not like any man I've known before, Mrs. Guthrie cast her a knowing look. No, I don't imagine the gentlemen of Boston have much in common with Quinn Blackwood. What was he like when you first came here? Dahlia asked, seizing the opportunity to learn more about Quinn's past. You've been with him longer than anyone except Domingo, haven't you? 5 years this October, Mrs. Guthrie confirmed. He was, harder then, more closed off. The ranch was just getting established and he worked from dawn past dusk every day. What changed him? The older woman considered as she stirred a pot of oatmeal. Time, mostly. Success. Proving to himself that he could build something worthwhile after. After what? Dahlia pressed when Mrs. Guthrie trailed off. After everything he lost in the war and after, the housekeeper said carefully. It's his story to tell, not mine. But I will say this: Quinn Blackwood is a man who's seen the worst of humanity and still chooses to believe in the best. That's rare, especially out here. Dahlia absorbed this, adding it to the puzzle that was Quinn. Whatever demons haunted him had shaped but not broken him, and that resilience only increased her admiration. The day passed uneventfully until mid-afternoon, when Dahlia, working in Quinn's office, heard the sound of approaching riders. Moving to the window, she counted 4 men on horseback approaching the main house. None were familiar, and something in their manner, the deliberate pace, the way they surveyed the property, raised her suspicions. She hurried to find Domingo, who was working with a new colt in the corral. Riders coming, she informed him, trying to keep her voice calm. 4 men I don't recognize. Domingo immediately dropped the training rope and vaulted over the corral fence with surprising agility for a man his age. Get inside, Señorita Dahlia. Find old Jim and tell him to bring Quinn's rifle from the bunkhouse. The urgency in his voice confirmed her unease. Dahlia hurried to obey, locating the cook in the garden harvesting late summer vegetables. Strangers riding in, she explained breathlessly. Domingo says to bring Quinn's rifle. Old Jim straightened immediately, his usual easygoing expression hardening. You get back to the house now. Stay with Mrs. Guthrie. By the time Dahlia reached the main house, the riders had arrived in the yard. From the window, she watched as Domingo and old Jim confronted them, joined moments later by young Toby, who emerged from the barn carrying a pitchfork that he tried to hold casually. Mrs. Guthrie appeared at her side, a double-barreled shotgun held competently in her weathered hands. Who are they? I don't know, Dahlia answered, her mouth dry with apprehension. But I have a suspicion they might be connected to the mining company's claim. One of the riders, a heavy-set man with a bushy mustache, dismounted and approached Domingo, gesturing expansively around the property as he spoke. Though Dahlia couldn't hear the words, the confrontational body language was clear. I should go out there, she said, moving toward the door. Quinn left me in charge. Mrs. Guthrie blocked her path with surprising strength for a woman of her years. You'll do no such thing. Those men didn't ride all this way for a friendly chat, and they won't take kindly to a woman asserting authority. But Domingo and the others know how to handle themselves, Mrs. Guthrie finished firmly. Our job is to be ready if things go badly." The standoff in the yard continued for several tense minutes. The mustached man produced papers similar to those Quinn had received, which Domingo refused to accept. The other riders remained mounted, hands resting casually near holstered weapons. Finally, after what appeared to be a heated exchange, the spokesman remounted his horse. As the group prepared to depart, he called out something that made Domingo's spine stiffen. Old Jim stepped forward, rifle raised slightly, and the riders quickly moved off. Dahlia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "They're leaving." "For now," Mrs. Guthrie said grimly, still clutching the shotgun, "but they'll be back." Domingo entered the house moments later, his normally impassive face tight with anger. "Survey crew," he spat. "From the mining company, say they're going to mark boundaries tomorrow." "They can't do that," Dahlia protested. "Not without legal proceedings. Did you tell them Mr. Blackwood is contesting their claim?" "Señorita, they say it makes no difference." "The company has permission from territorial officials." Domingo's dark eyes flashed. "The chief, their boss, he say we should be grateful they don't remove us from the property entirely." Mrs. Guthrie muttered something under her breath that made Domingo's eyebrows rise in surprise. "We need Quinn," she said more clearly. "Is there any way to get word to him in Laramie?" Dahlia thought quickly. "The telegraph office in Cottonwood. It's closer than Laramie. Someone could ride there and send a message." "I'll go," Toby volunteered from the doorway where he'd been listening. "I'm the fastest rider anyway." Dahlia quickly penned a message explaining the situation, and Toby departed immediately for Cottonwood, promising to wait for any reply from Quinn. The remainder of the day passed in anxious preparation. Old Jim and Domingo checked and cleaned weapons, while Mrs. Guthrie and Dahlia prepared extra food and gathered medical supplies, just in case. No one spoke aloud the fear that violence might erupt, but the possibility hung in the air like gunsmoke. Night fell without word from Quinn or Toby's return. Domingo insisted on standing watch from the porch, refusing all suggestions that he get some rest. "I have guarded this ranch since before there was a house," he told Dahlia when she brought him coffee and a plate of food. "I will not fail Quinn now. How did you come to work for him?" Dahlia asked, settling beside him on the porch steps. The night was cool but clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Wyoming sky. Domingo sipped his coffee before answering. "It was after the war." Quinn had nothing then, no money, no home, only the clothes he wore and that big Palomino horse. "He stopped at a cantina where I was working in southern Colorado. Some men there, bad men, they recognized him from somewhere." "Recognized him?" Dahlia echoed, her curiosity piqued. "From during the war, I think, there was trouble." Domingo gestured vaguely. "Fighting, Quinn was outnumbered, but he fought like a demon. I helped him because these men, they were always causing problems." "What happened?" "We won," Domingo said simply, "but Quinn was hurt badly. I took him to my sister's home, where she cared for him until he healed. Afterward, he asked if I would come with him. He had heard of land for sale in Wyoming Territory and wanted to start fresh." "And you agreed, just like that?" Domingo's weathered face creased in a rare smile. "I had nothing to keep me there. My sister had married, and I was tired of working for others who did not value my skills with horses. Quinn offered partnership, not just employment. He is a man of honor." "Yes," Dahlia agreed softly. "I believe he is." They sat in companionable silence until the sound of an approaching horse brought them both to alert attention. Domingo reached for his rifle, but Dahlia laid a restraining hand on his arm. "It's Toby," she said, recognizing the young cowboy's distinctive riding posture even in the moonlight. Toby dismounted quickly, looking exhausted but determined. "Got a reply from Mr. Blackwood," he announced, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "Telegraph operator said it came through just as he was closing up." Dahlia unfolded the message with trembling fingers. "Returning immediately, stop papers in order, stop do nothing until I arrive, stop Quinn, he's coming," she told the others, relief evident in her voice. "We just need to hold off the survey crew until he gets here." "That won't be easy," old Jim predicted from the doorway. "Mining companies don't like being told no." "Then we won't tell them no," Dahlia said, an idea forming. "We'll tell them wait." The others looked at her questioningly, and she outlined her plan. By the time they retired for the night, a strategy was in place, one that might buy them the time they needed without risking outright confrontation. Morning brought the survey crew as promised, this time accompanied by 2 additional men who appeared to be hired guns rather than surveyors. They were met not by defensive ranch hands with weapons, but by Dahlia herself, dressed in her finest borrowed dress with her hair neatly arranged. "Gentlemen," she greeted them pleasantly as they dismounted. "I'm Dahlia Montgomery, Mr. Blackwood's associate. I understand you're here regarding the property claim." The mustached man who had acted as spokesman the previous day eyed her with suspicion. "That's right. We're here to mark the company's boundaries. Who are you exactly?" "I manage Mr. Blackwood's business affairs," Dahlia replied smoothly, not technically a lie. "He's currently in Laramie consulting with his attorney but will return by tomorrow. He's asked that any surveying be delayed until he can be present to review the documents personally." The man frowned. "We have our orders, madam. The company wants this done today." "I understand completely," Dahlia said, maintaining her pleasant tone while mentally thanking her mother for those tedious society lessons in diplomacy. "However, I'm sure your employers would prefer to avoid any legal complications. Mr. Blackwood has evidence that contradicts your claim, which he'll present upon his return. A single day's delay seems a small concession to prevent potential litigation." The surveyors exchanged uncertain glances while the hired guns remained impassively mounted behind them. "Furthermore," Dahlia continued, pressing her advantage, "I've taken the liberty of preparing breakfast. You must have ridden some distance this morning, and there's no reason we can't discuss this civilly over coffee and Mrs. Guthrie's excellent biscuits." It was a calculated risk. Men who would accept such hospitality might find it harder to take aggressive action afterward. And indeed, after a brief consultation among themselves, the mustached man who introduced himself as Harlan Fisher, chief surveyor for Western Mining Consortium, agreed to the meal, if not necessarily to the delay. Mrs. Guthrie had outdone herself, preparing a spread that would have impressed even the finest Boston hostesses. As the men ate their fill, Dahlia kept the conversation deliberately light, asking about their work and families rather than the disputed claim. By the time the meal concluded, the surveyors' rigid postures had relaxed somewhat, though the hired guns remained watchful by the door, declining all offers of food. "Miss Montgomery," Fisher finally said, patting his mustache with a napkin, "I appreciate the hospitality, but we still have a job to do." "Of course," Dahlia acknowledged, "but perhaps you could begin with the undisputed portions of the property. That would allow you to make progress while still respecting Mr. Blackwood's request regarding the northeastern section." Fisher hesitated, clearly torn between his orders and the reasonable compromise Dahlia offered. "I suppose we could start with the western boundary," he conceded reluctantly. "But we'll need to complete the entire survey by tomorrow, with or without Mr. Blackwood's presence." It wasn't a complete victory, but it bought them the time they needed. As the survey crew departed to begin work on the far side of the property, Domingo gave Dahlia an approving nod. "You handle them better than we could have," he acknowledged, "but tomorrow will be different if Quinn is not back." "He'll be here," Dahlia said with more confidence than she felt. "He has to be." The day passed with agonizing slowness as the survey crew worked their way around the property's perimeter, deliberately avoiding the contested northeastern section for now. Dahlia kept herself busy with household tasks, but her mind remained fixed on the approaching confrontation and on Quinn's absence. By late afternoon, with still no sign of Quinn, Dahlia's anxiety had reached a fever pitch. What if something had delayed him in Laramie? What if the telegram hadn't reached him at all? The consequences of facing the mining company's claim without him were too dire to contemplate. She was hanging the last of the day's laundry when the sound of hoofbeats once again drew her attention to the main road. This time, however, her heart leaped with recognition. Quinn's tall figure astride Shadow was unmistakable, even at a distance. Abandoning the laundry basket, Dahlia hurried to meet him as he rode into the yard. Quinn dismounted in a fluid motion that belied the exhaustion evident on his face. He must have ridden through the night to return so quickly. "You got my message," she said, unable to keep the relief from her voice. "Just in time," he confirmed, his eyes quickly scanning the property. "Where are they?" "The survey crew, working the western boundary. I convinced them to start there and leave the disputed section until tomorrow." Quinn's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You did?" "With biscuits and diplomacy," Dahlia explained with a small smile. "But they were quite clear that they intend to survey the northeastern section tomorrow, with or without your consent." "They'll have neither consent nor opportunity," Quinn said grimly, reaching into his saddlebag to produce a leather document case. "I have the original deed, bill of sale, and now a court injunction preventing any survey until the territorial judge can review the competing claims." Dahlia's eyes widened. "How did you manage that so quickly?" "I have friends in Laramie," Quinn said, a hint of his usual wry humor returning. "And it seems the Western Mining Consortium has made enemies among the legitimate business community. This isn't the first time they've attempted to seize property through dubious claims." Relief washed over Dahlia. "So Whispering Pines is safe?" "For now," Quinn qualified. "The legal battle isn't over, but this prevents them from establishing any physical claim to the land while the case proceeds." His expression softened as he looked at her. "Domingo told me how you handled things here. That was quick thinking, Dahlia." The approval in his voice warmed her more than it should have. "I did what anyone would do to protect their home." Quinn's gaze held hers. "Is that how you think of Whispering Pines now, as home?" "Yes," Dahlia admitted quietly. "More than any place has been since my mother died." Something flickered in Quinn's eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. But before he could respond, the approaching survey crew interrupted the moment. Fisher and his men rode into the yard, clearly surprised to find Quinn present. What followed was a tense, but ultimately anticlimactic confrontation. Quinn presented the court injunction with calm authority, weathering Fisher's blustering protests with impassive patience. The hired guns exchanged glances that suggested they recognized Quinn, though no words were spoken to confirm this impression. Finally, faced with a legal document they couldn't ignore and Quinn's unwavering stance, the survey crew departed with promises that the company's lawyers would be in touch. "Well done," Dahlia said softly as they watched the men ride away. Quinn's shoulders relaxed fractionally. "It's just the first skirmish in what could be a long fight. These mining interests don't give up easily." "Neither do you," Dahlia pointed out. Quinn turned to her, his expression serious. "I need to thank you properly for what you did. You kept a potentially explosive situation from igniting. Not many would have had the presence of mind to handle it as you did." "I was terrified," Dahlia confessed, "but I couldn't let them take what you've built without a fight." Quinn studied her face for a long moment. "You've changed since you arrived here. The woman I found in Cottonwood wouldn't have stood up to a crew of hardened surveyors and their hired guns." "Perhaps she was always there, beneath the dust and shame," Dahlia suggested. "Waiting for someone to see her." "Someone did," Quinn said quietly, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "From the very beginning." The gentle touch sent warmth cascading through Dahlia. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her, wanted him to, she realized with startling clarity. But Quinn withdrew his hand, the moment passing like a cloud shadow across the plains. "I should see to Shadow," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "He's had a hard ride." As he led his horse toward the barn, Dahlia touched her cheek where his fingers had been, wondering at the emotions stirring within her and at what might have happened if they hadn't been interrupted. The following weeks brought a change to Whispering Pines. With the immediate threat from the mining company legally forestalled, Quinn turned his attention to strengthening the ranch's defenses against future challenges. Additional hands were hired, bringing the total to 6 men plus Old Jim and Domingo. Boundary markers were reinforced, and regular patrols were established along the property lines. Dahlia found her role expanding as well. What had begun as simple bookkeeping evolved into something closer to partnership, as Quinn increasingly sought her opinion on business matters. Her education and Eastern background provided perspectives that complemented his practical frontier experience. Their working relationship developed an easy rhythm, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of awareness that neither acknowledged openly. Occasional touches his hand steadying her as she mounted a horse, her fingers brushing his as she passed documents lingered longer than necessary. Conversations stretched into the evening hours, ranging far beyond ranch business to personal philosophies and dreams for the future. Mrs. Guthrie observed these developments with knowing eyes, but made no comment beyond an occasional meaningful glance when the two lingered together over morning coffee or evening paperwork. Autumn arrived in a blaze of color, the aspen groves surrounding Whispering Pines turning brilliant gold against the evergreen backdrop. Preparations for winter occupied everyone's attention, hay to be stored, food preserved, buildings weatherproofed against the coming snow. "First winter in Wyoming," Quinn commented as he and Dahlia rode the property one crisp October afternoon. "Are you ready for it?" Dahlia patted the neck of the gentle mare Quinn had given her for her birthday the previous month, a gesture that had touched her deeply. "I think so, Mrs. Guthrie has been educating me on the finer points of surviving a mountain winter." "It can be brutal," Quinn acknowledged, scanning the distant peaks where snow already gleamed. "But beautiful, too. There's nothing quite like Whispering Pines under a blanket of fresh snow." "I look forward to seeing it," Dahlia said, then hesitated before adding, "Quinn, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." He turned to her, his expression open. "What is it?" "The mining company's claim, is there any news? It's been weeks since we've heard anything." Quinn's face darkened slightly. "My attorney in Laramie believes they're regrouping. These corporate interests play a long game. They may be waiting for winter to press their advantage, thinking we'll be more vulnerable when snowed in. Do you think there will be trouble?" "I hope not," Quinn said, his gaze sweeping the peaceful landscape. "But hope makes a poor defense. That's why I've hired extra hands and stockpiled supplies." They rode in silence for a moment before Dahlia gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind for months. "Quinn, what aren't you telling me about your past? The mining company men, they seem to recognize you, and not just as a rancher." Quinn's jaw tightened, but he didn't immediately shut down the conversation as he might have once done. "It's complicated, Dahlia." "I can handle complicated," she said gently. "I care about Whispering Pines and its owner. If there's something in your past that affects our present situation, I'd like to understand it." Quinn reined his horse to a stop atop a small rise overlooking the ranch buildings below. Dahlia halted beside him, waiting patiently as he gathered his thoughts. "After the war," he finally began, his voice low, "I was lost. The Confederacy's defeat meant I had no home to return to. My family's plantation in Virginia was burned, my parents dead from typhoid, my younger brother killed at Gettysburg. I drifted west, taking whatever work I could find." He paused, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "For a time, I rode with some men who operated on both sides of the law. We provided security for mining operations, stagecoach lines, cattle drives, but some of the men weren't particular about staying within legal boundaries." "You were an outlaw?" Dahlia asked, unable to reconcile this with the honorable man she knew. "No," Quinn said firmly. "I never stole or killed except in self-defense, but I associated with men who did, and that's enough to tarnish a reputation out here." When I realized how far some of them were willing to go, I left. That decision wasn't popular. What happened? Quinn's expression hardened. There was a confrontation. Men died good and bad. I walked away with a bullet in my shoulder and a price on my head among certain circles. That's when I met Domingo and decided to start fresh. And the mining company. Dahlia prompted. How do they connect to this? One of their principal investors was involved with the same outfit I rode with, Quinn explained. Cyrus Welton. He bankrolled some of their more unsavory activities while maintaining a respectable facade. When I left, I took evidence of his involvement insurance in case he ever came after me. And now he has, Dahlia realized. Through the mining claim, Quinn nodded grimly. It's a clever approach. If he can take Whispering Pines legally, he not only gets revenge but valuable property as well. And if I try to use what I know against him, it only reinforces my connection to the gang. What will you do? Fight him through legal channels as long as possible, Quinn said, and be prepared for less legal approaches if that fails. Dahlia absorbed this information, fitting it into her understanding of the man beside her. Thank you for telling me. It can't have been easy to revisit those memories. Quinn turned to her, his expression softening. There was a time I wouldn't have, but you've earned my trust, Dahlia. More than anyone has in a very long time. The simple declaration meant more to her than flowery professions of admiration ever could. And you have mine, she replied. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Something shifted in Quinn's eyes at her words, a warming, a lowering of final defenses. Together, he echoed, the single word carrying weight beyond its brevity. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, a new understanding between them that transcended words. As they approached the main house, however, the peaceful moment shattered at the sight of a familiar black buggy parked in the yard. Lawrence Davies, Quinn identified the mining company's attorney with a frown. Unexpected and unwelcome. Dahlia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. What could he want? Let's find out. Quinn's expression hardened as he dismounted and helped Dahlia down from her horse. They found Davies in the parlor, where Mrs. Guthrie had reluctantly served him tea. The attorney rose as they entered, his thin face arranged in a professionally pleasant expression that didn't reach his calculating eyes. Mr. Blackwood, Miss Montgomery, thank you for receiving me without appointment. You've ridden a long way for a social call, Davies, Quinn said, remaining standing though he gestured for Dahlia to sit. State your business. Davies cleared his throat. I bring a proposal from my client, the Western Mining Consortium, or more specifically, from Mr. Cyrus Welton, who has taken a personal interest in resolving our dispute amicably. There's nothing to resolve, Quinn countered. Your client's claim is fraudulent, as the territorial court will confirm when our case is heard. Ah, but court proceedings are so lengthy and costly, Davies lamented with false concern. Mr. Welton prefers a more immediate resolution. He withdrew an envelope from his breast pocket. He's prepared to offer you a very generous sum for Whispering Pines, far more than its market value. Quinn didn't reach for the envelope. Not interested. I urge you to at least review the offer, Davies persisted. Winter is coming, Mr. Blackwood. Wyoming winters can be so unpredictable, travel becomes difficult, supplies run short, accidents happen. It would be a shame if any misfortune befell your establishment. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air like gunsmoke. Dahlia looked at Quinn, whose expression had gone dangerously still. Mr. Davies, Quinn said, his voice deceptively calm, I suggest you leave Whispering Pines immediately, while you still can. Tell Welton his money's no good here, and neither are his threats. This land is mine, legally and morally, and I will defend it by any means necessary. The attorney's facade of civility cracked momentarily, revealing the malice beneath. Mr. Welton anticipated your response. He asked me to remind you of Julesburg, Colorado. He says you'll understand the reference. Quinn's face drained of color, the only indication that the message had struck home. Get out, he said quietly. Now, Davies smiled thinly, placing the envelope on the table. The offer remains open until the first snowfall. After that, Mr. Welton cannot guarantee the safety of anyone at Whispering Pines. He nodded curtly to Dahlia. Miss Montgomery, a pleasure as always. I do hope you'll use your influence to encourage Mr. Blackwood toward reason. After the attorney's departure, Quinn remained motionless, staring at the envelope as if it might explode. Quinn, Dahlia ventured, what did he mean about Julesburg? It's where everything ended with Welton's gang, Quinn said, his voice hollow. Where good men died because of my decisions. Dahlia moved to stand beside him, placing her hand gently on his arm. You're not alone this time. Quinn covered her hand with his own, the gesture conveying what words could not. No, he agreed softly. I'm not. The days following Davy's visit brought increased vigilance to Whispering Pines. Quinn doubled the night patrols and sent old Jim to neighboring ranches to alert them to possible trouble. Supplies were stockpiled, weapons cleaned and readied, escape routes planned in case the worst happened. Through it all, Dahlia remained a steadying presence. Her practical intelligence and quiet courage impressed even the skeptical ranch hands, who had initially questioned her place in their defensive preparations. The ladies got sand. Old Jim commented to Quinn one evening as they watched Dahlia practice with a Winchester rifle. Her aim was improving daily under Domingo's patient instruction. Reminds me of frontier women I knew as a boy, soft on the outside, steel within. Quinn nodded, unable to articulate the complex emotions that surfaced whenever he watched Dahlia adapt to yet another challenge. Pride, certainly. Admiration. And something deeper that he wasn't yet ready to name, though it grew stronger with each passing day. As October gave way to November, the first serious snowfall blanketed Whispering Pines in pristine white. The beauty of the transformation was tempered by the knowledge that Welton's deadline had passed. Whatever was coming would come soon, before winter made the mountain passes impassable. The attack, when it finally came, was both unexpected in its timing and devastating in its execution. Not a frontal assault as Quinn had anticipated, but a precision strike at the ranch's most vulnerable point. Dahlia was awakened in the pre-dawn hours by the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, momentarily disoriented until the crackling sound of flames registered in her consciousness. Throwing on a robe, she rushed from her room to find the main house's kitchen engulfed in fire, with flames already spreading to the adjacent rooms. Mrs. Guthrie, she called, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. Quinn. The housekeeper emerged from her room at the back of the house, clutching a small bundle of possessions. Out the back door, she directed. The front's already gone. Together they stumbled through the increasingly smoke-filled house, reaching the back entrance just as the roof began to groan ominously above them. Outside, the bitter cold hit Dahlia like a physical blow, her thin nightclothes and robe providing little protection against the November night. The yard was chaos, men shouting, horses whinnying in fear from the barn, gunshots echoing from the direction of the bunkhouse. Of Quinn, there was no sign. Get to the storm cellar, Mrs. Guthrie urged, pushing Dahlia toward the earthen mound 50 yards from the burning house. It's safest there. Not without Quinn, Dahlia insisted, scanning the yard desperately. Where is he? A figure emerged from the darkness, not Quinn, but Toby, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Miss Montgomery, he gasped. Thank God you're out. The boss is at the north pasture with Domingo. They were checking on the new calves when the attack came. Attack, Dahlia echoed, her worst fears confirmed. How many? At least 10 men, Toby reported grimly. They hit the bunkhouse first, then set the fire. Jim and the boys are holding them off, but they're outgunned. As if to emphasize his point, a fresh volley of gunfire erupted from the direction of the bunkhouse. In the flickering light of the burning house, Dahlia could make out dark figures moving between outbuildings, using the structures for cover as they exchanged fire with the defenders. A decision crystallized in Dahlia's mind, clear and certain despite the chaos surrounding her. Mrs. Guthrie, get to the storm cellar and stay there, she instructed. Toby, I need a horse. Miss, you can't, the young cowboy began. Quinn needs to know what's happening, Dahlia cut him off. I'm the only one who can reach him without drawing fire. The attackers don't know I'm here. They'll be watching for men, not a woman. Toby hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Take Misty from the small corral. She's quick and sure-footed in the snow. The north pastures about 2 miles follow the creek up past the big lightning-struck pine. Dahlia squeezed his arm in gratitude. Hold them off as long as you can. Help is coming. Moving swiftly through the shadows, avoiding the areas illuminated by the burning house, Dahlia made her way to the small corral where the mare waited, already nervous from the commotion. Speaking softly to calm the animal, she bridled Misty and mounted bareback, having no time for a saddle. The ride through the snow-covered darkness was the most terrifying journey of Dahlia's life. The mare stumbled several times on hidden obstacles beneath the snow, and branches whipped at Dahlia's face as they followed the creek's winding path. The cold cut through her inadequate clothing, numbing her hands until she could barely maintain her grip on the reins. Only the knowledge that Quinn and everyone at Whispering Pines depended on her kept Dahlia pushing forward when exhaustion and cold threatened to overwhelm her. The sound of gunfire faded behind her as she rode deeper into the ranch's northern reaches, where the high pasture sheltered the most vulnerable cattle during winter storms. She almost missed the small cabin that served as shelter for hands checking the herd. Only a thin wisp of smoke from its chimney, barely visible against the night sky, alerted her to its presence. Dahlia guided Misty toward it, her heart pounding with relief and urgency. "Quinn," she called as she neared the structure. "Quinn, are you there?" The cabin door flew open and Quinn emerged, rifle in hand. His expression transformed from alertness to shock as he recognized her. "Dahlia? What in God's name? The ranch is under attack," she gasped, sliding from Misty's back on legs so numb she nearly collapsed. "Men, at least 10. They've burned the main house and have the bunkhouse surrounded." Quinn caught her as her knees buckled, lifting her easily and carrying her into the cabin's warmth. Domingo was already moving, gathering weapons and extinguishing the small fire in the hearth. How long ago? Quinn demanded as he wrapped a blanket around Dahlia's shivering form. "Maybe an hour," she managed through chattering teeth. "Toby said old Jim and the others were holding them off, but they're outgunned." Quinn's face hardened into lines of cold fury. "Welton," he spat. "This has his signature all over it. Domingo, how many rifles do we have here?" 3 plus your revolver, the Mexican answered, already checking the weapons. "Not enough," Quinn muttered, "but we'll make do." He turned back to Dahlia, his expression softening briefly. "You shouldn't have risked yourself like this." "What was I supposed to do?" she challenged, some warmth returning to her limbs with painful intensity. "Hide in the storm cellar while Welton's men destroyed everything you've built, everything we've built." Something flickered in Quinn's eyes at her words, but there was no time to decipher it. "Can you ride back, or do you need to stay here?" "I can ride," Dahlia said with more confidence than she felt, "but I'll need proper clothes first." Quinn quickly found a spare shirt, coat, and trousers from the cabin's supplies. They were far too large but would provide better protection than her night clothes. He turned his back while she changed, then helped her pull on a pair of boots that had to be stuffed with rags to fit her smaller feet. "Stay close to me," Quinn instructed as they prepared to leave. "When we get within sight of the ranch, you'll go directly to the storm cellar and stay there until this is over." "Understood," Dahlia wanted to argue but recognized the determination in his face. "Understood." The ride back was faster, but no less harrowing. Quinn led the way on Shadow, with Dahlia following on Misty and Domingo bringing up the rear. They kept to the tree line where possible, using the forest's cover to approach the ranch unseen. The scene that greeted them as they crested the final ridge was one of nightmarish destruction. The main house was now fully engulfed, its roof partially collapsed. The bunkhouse showed signs of damage from gunfire, and several smaller outbuildings smoldered. Bodies Dahlia couldn't tell whose lay motionless in the snow-covered yard. "My God," she whispered. Quinn's expression was grimmer than she'd ever seen it. "Domingo, circle around to the east. I'll take the west. We'll catch them in crossfire and drive them toward the creek bed where they'll have no cover." "What about the men in the bunkhouse?" Dahlia asked. "If any are still alive, they'll join the fight when they hear us," Quinn said bluntly. "Dahlia, the storm cellar is there." He pointed to the mound that remained untouched by the destruction. "Go now, and don't come out until one of us comes for you." She nodded, suddenly reluctant to leave his side despite the danger ahead. "Quinn, I know," he interrupted softly. "Me too, now go." The simple exchange conveyed everything they hadn't yet said to each other. Dahlia touched his arm briefly, then urged Misty toward the storm cellar as the men separated to execute their plan. She had almost reached the cellar when a shot rang out, closer than expected. Misty reared in panic, throwing Dahlia into the snow. As she struggled to rise, a dark figure loomed over her, one of Welton's men, his face masked by a bandana. "Well, what have we here?" he growled, reaching down to grab her arm. "Blackwood's woman, I reckon." Dahlia twisted away, her hand closing around a piece of firewood that had fallen from the woodpile near the cellar. With strength born of desperation, she swung it at her attacker's head. The wood connected with a sickening crack, and the man staggered backward before collapsing in the snow. Scrambling to her feet, Dahlia ran the remaining distance to the cellar, pulling open the heavy doors and descending into the earthy darkness below. Mrs. Guthrie was there, shotgun ready, along with a wounded ranch hand Dahlia recognized as one of the newer hires. "Thank God," the housekeeper breathed. "We feared the worst when we heard more riders. It's Quinn and Domingo," Dahlia explained breathlessly. "They're going to try to drive the attackers off." No sooner had she spoken than the night erupted with renewed gunfire more intense than before, as Quinn and Domingo engaged the attackers from opposite sides. The wounded ranch hand struggled to his feet. "I should be out there," he insisted, despite the blood-stained bandage around his thigh. "You'd be a liability, not help," Mrs. Guthrie said firmly. "Stay put." The gunfire continued for what seemed an eternity but was likely only minutes. Then, gradually, it began to taper off, with longer intervals between shots. Finally, an eerie silence descended, broken only by the distant crackling of the still burning house. "Is it over?" Dahlia whispered. Mrs. Guthrie shook her head. "No way to know for certain." They waited in tense silence, straining to hear any sound from above that might indicate the battle's outcome. After what felt like hours but was perhaps only 20 minutes, footsteps approached the cellar doors. "Dahlia, Mrs. Guthrie," Quinn's voice, rough with exhaustion but unmistakably his. Dahlia nearly collapsed with relief as Mrs. Guthrie called back. "We're here. Is it safe?" "Yes," came the reply. "They're gone." They emerged from the cellar to a scene of desolation illuminated by the first rays of dawn. The main house was a smoldering ruin, the bunkhouse riddled with bullet holes. Bodies lay scattered across the ranch yard, 4 of Welton's men that Dahlia could count, and with a wrench of anguish, 2 of Quinn's hands as well. Quinn himself stood in the center of the yard, blood seeping from a gash in his left arm but otherwise apparently unharmed. His face was streaked with soot and grim determination as he directed the surviving ranch hands in securing the perimeter. When he saw Dahlia, something in his expression shifted relief mingled with a fierce emotion she couldn't quite name. He crossed to her in long strides, stopping just short of embracing her. "You're all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Yes," she assured him. "Mrs. Guthrie and Jackson, too." She gestured to the wounded hand who had emerged behind her. "Quinn, the house. Buildings can be rebuilt," he said firmly. "Lives can't be replaced." Old Jim approached, his weathered face somber. "We lost Pete and young Thomas," he reported. "Toby's hurt bad, but Domingo thinks he'll pull through. We counted 6 dead attackers, and they took at least 2 wounded with them when they fled." Quinn nodded grimly. "They'll be back. Welton won't accept defeat this easily." "What do we do now?" Dahlia asked, surveying the destruction of what had become her home. Quinn's gaze swept the ranch before returning to her face with surprising tenderness. "We rebuild, we bury our dead, and we prepare for what comes next." The barn's still standing, old Jim pointed out. "We can bunk there until we get something more permanent." "See to it," Quinn instructed. "And send Domingo to Laramie as soon as he's patched up Toby. The territorial marshal needs to know what happened here." As the others moved to carry out his orders, Quinn turned back to Dahlia. Now that the immediate danger had passed, exhaustion was evident in every line of his body. "You saved us all," he said quietly, "riding through the night like that it was the bravest thing I've ever seen." "I was terrified," Dahlia admitted. "But not as terrified as I was of losing," she stopped, suddenly aware of how much she was revealing. "Losing what?" Quinn prompted, his voice gentle. Dahlia met his gaze steadily. "Losing you, losing this place, losing everything that's come to matter to me." Quinn reached out slowly, as if giving her time to withdraw, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You know, when I found you in Cottonwood, covered in dust and shame, I saw something in you that you couldn't see in yourself. Strength. Courage. A spirit that wouldn't break no matter what life threw at it." "That's not what I saw when I looked at myself," Dahlia whispered. "No," Quinn agreed, "but it's what I saw when I looked at you, and I see it even more clearly now." His hand lingered on her cheek, and Dahlia leaned into the touch. "Quinn," the moment was interrupted by a shout from one of the hands. "Riders coming, from the east." Quinn turned sharply, his hand moving to his revolver. "How many?" "Looks like 3, came the reply. "One's wearing a badge." Relief washed over Quinn's features. "The marshal," he explained to Dahlia. "I sent word to him after Davy's visit, warning that trouble might be coming. Looks like he arrived too late to prevent it, but perhaps in time to help us deal with the aftermath." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The territorial marshal, a grizzled veteran named Harker, took statements from everyone at the ranch while his deputies tracked the retreating attackers. The dead were laid out respectfully in the barn, and the wounded tended as best they could with limited supplies. Through it all, Dahlia worked alongside the others, her exhaustion forgotten in the face of immediate needs. She helped Mrs. Guthrie salvage what little could be recovered from the burned house, organized the remaining food supplies, and tended to minor injuries. It was late afternoon before she finally sat down on an upturned bucket outside the barn, her body suddenly reminding her that she had been awake for more than 30 hours, much of it in extreme stress and cold. Quinn found her there, staring at the ruins of the main house with unseeing eyes. "You should rest," he said gently, crouching beside her. His own injury had been bandaged, and he'd cleaned the worst of the soot from his face. "So should you," she countered. "Have you slept at all?" "Sleep can wait," Quinn said, though the fatigue in his voice belied his words. "Marshal Harker has enough evidence to move against Welton now. Between our testimonies and what his deputies found on the dead attackers, including direct payment records, Welton's days of hiding behind respectability are over. Will that be enough to keep Whispering Pines safe?" Quinn nodded slowly. "I believe so. Men like Welton operate in shadows. Once exposed to light, their power diminishes rapidly. His investors will abandon him rather than be associated with attempted murder." "And the mining claim?" "Already withdrawn," Quinn confirmed with grim satisfaction. "Davies rode in about an hour ago, white as a sheet, with papers relinquishing all claims to Whispering Pines property. Apparently, news of Welton's impending arrest reached him in Cottonwood." Relief washed over Dahlia, but it was tempered by the day's losses. "Poor Thomas. And Pete. They died defending your land." "Our land," Quinn corrected quietly. "If you want it to be." Dahlia's tired mind struggled to process his meaning. "What are you saying?" Quinn took her cold hands in his warm ones. I'm not saying this well, and the timing is terrible, but the events of last night made something very clear to me. Life is unpredictable and often short out here. Waiting for the perfect moment to speak what's in your heart is a luxury we can't afford. Dahlia's pulse quickened. And what is in your heart, Quinn Blackwood? You, he said simply. You've been there since I found you in Cottonwood, though I tried to deny it at first. When I saw you ride in last night, risking everything to warn us, I knew I couldn't pretend any longer. Pretend what? Dahlia whispered, though she thought she knew the answer. That I'm not in love with you, Quinn said, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that took her breath away. That I don't want you by my side not just as my bookkeeper or friend, but as my wife, my partner in everything. Despite her exhaustion, joy bloomed within Dahlia like a desert flower after rain. I thought perhaps it was just gratitude I felt, she admitted, for saving me from Cottonwood, for giving me purpose again. But it's so much more than that, Quinn. I love you too, your strength, your integrity, your kindness. I love the life we've begun to build here, even now when it lies in ashes around us. Quinn's smile transformed his weary face. We'll rebuild it better than before, together. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Dahlia met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that held all the promise of their future tender yet passionate, gentle yet strong. When they finally parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, Dahlia Montgomery. Not just because it's practical or proper, but because I can't imagine waking up another day without knowing you'll be by my side through whatever comes. Yes, Dahlia answered without hesitation. Though I should warn you, I still can't make a decent apple pie despite Mrs. Guthrie's best efforts. Quinn laughed, the sound bright and unexpected amid the day's somber aftermath. I don't love you for your baking skills. No, Dahlia teased, feeling lighthearted despite everything. What do you love me for, then? Quinn's expression sobered, though tenderness remained in his eyes. For your courage, your intelligence, your ability to see beauty and possibility where others see only hardship. For the way you transformed from the woman covered in dust and shame to the one who rode through darkness to save us, although the strength was always there, waiting to be recognized. You saw it first, Dahlia reminded him softly. That day in Cottonwood. And I see it more clearly every day, Quinn affirmed, bringing her hands to his lips and kissing them gently. Now come on. We both need rest if we're going to start rebuilding tomorrow. As they walked toward the barn where temporary quarters had been arranged, Dahlia looked once more at the smoldering ruins of the house where she had begun to find herself. Rather than despair, she felt a curious sense of anticipation. From these ashes, something new would rise, a home designed with both their hands, a future forged through shared adversity. You're smiling, Quinn observed, his arm around her shoulders. I was just thinking that we have the chance to build exactly what we want now, Dahlia explained. A fresh start. Quinn's arm tightened around her. I like the way you think, future Mrs. Blackwood. Spring came to Whispering Pines with a gentle persistence that mirrored the ranch's rebirth. The new main house stood completed after a winter of intense labor larger than its predecessor, with wide windows that captured the mountain views and a wraparound porch where Dahlia had insisted they would sit on summer evenings watching the sunset. Quinn and Dahlia had married in December, a simple ceremony performed by a traveling minister in the newly rebuilt bunkhouse. Mrs. Guthrie had crafted a wedding dress from fabrics ordered from Laramie, and the entire community, including neighboring ranchers who had come to their aid after the attack, gathered to celebrate not just the union, but the survival of Whispering Pines itself. Cyrus Welton faced justice in Cheyenne, his corporate empire crumbling as investors fled the scandal. His conviction for murder and conspiracy ensured he would never again threaten Whispering Pines or its inhabitants. Life settled into new rhythms for the newlyweds. Quinn's natural reticence gradually gave way to open affection. while Dahlia discovered unexpected talents for ranch management that complemented her bookkeeping skills. Together, they expanded the operation, introducing improved cattle breeds and investing in neighboring properties when they became available. On a warm May afternoon, Dahlia stood on the porch of their new home, watching Quinn work with Domingo in the corral below. Her hand rested lightly on her stomach, where the first subtle signs of their child had begun to make themselves known, a secret she planned to share with Quinn that evening. Mrs. Guthrie emerged from the house, drying her hands on her ever-present apron. "Dinner's almost ready." "You want to call them in?" Dahlia smiled, her gaze still on her husband. "In a minute, I'm enjoying the view." The housekeeper followed her gaze and chuckled. "You two, still mooning over each other like newlyweds." "We are newlyweds," Dahlia pointed out. "It hasn't even been 6 months." Mrs. Guthrie hummed skeptically. "And I suspect you'll be the same after 60 years, Dahlia laughed. "I certainly hope so." As if sensing her attention, Quinn looked up from the corral, raising a hand in greeting. Dahlia waved back, her heart full with a contentment she had never imagined possible during those desperate days in Cottonwood. From dust and shame to love and purpose, the journey had been neither easy nor expected. But as Quinn strode toward the house, his face lighting with pleasure at the sight of her waiting, Dahlia knew with absolute certainty that every step had led exactly where she was meant to be. "What are you thinking about so intently?" Quinn asked as he reached the porch, pulling off his work gloves. Dahlia smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "About our future," she said simply, "and how much brighter it just became." Quinn's expression transformed as understanding dawned. "Are you certain?" he asked, voice hushed with wonder. "Very," Dahlia confirmed, her eyes shining. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it when he was here checking on Toby's leg yesterday." Joy spread across Quinn's face, and he lifted her in a gentle embrace that conveyed more than words ever could. As he set her down, he kissed her with tender reverence. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "For what?" Dahlia asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "For riding into Cottonwood that day," Quinn said. "For being brave enough to trust a stranger, for building this life with me." His hand rested protectively over their growing child. "For everything that matters." As they stood together on the porch of the home they had rebuilt from ashes, Dahlia thought of how far they had come, not just in distance, but in healing, in growth, in love. The woman who had once been covered in dust and shame had found not just sanctuary but strength, not just survival but joy, and it had begun with 7 simple words from a dusty cowboy. "That's not what I see when I look at you."